to establish a small, modest People's Cultural Center where youth from the bastis where we work and perform could be trained, as well as a space that would become a home for alternative theatre practice. We are pleased to say that we are working very concretely towards realizing that dream now, and we are confident that with your help we'll be able to not only raise the requisite finances, but also make the prospective centre a lively and socially charged space. Today's lecture is going to be chaired by Professor Alok Rai. Professor Rai teaches at the University of Delhi and is one of our most incisive critics. May I invite Professor Rai onto the stage. We all know Henning Mankell as a writer of crime fiction. Crime fiction itself, to my mind, broadly of two kinds. One that focuses on the criminal as an evil genius and thereby somehow seduces us. And the other that focuses on the society that gives birth to crime. And it is this kind of fiction that makes us pause and reflect. Henning Mankell is one of the finest writers of this latter kind. But perhaps what is not so well known is the fact that, at least in India it's not known, that Henning Mankell, along with his wife Eva Bergman, is a practicing theatre person. He is a playwright and is connected to the Mutumbela Gogo at the Teatro Alvanida in Mozambique.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Madam. Friends, I don't know if at that height whether I should stand or sit, probably hold it like this, like a rock star. Anyway, Mr. Henning Mankell is a celebrity. He's a celebrity in many different ways, as Mala has already indicated. He's a theatre person, he is a crime writer of extraordinary stature. But he is apart from being many different kinds of celebrity, I suppose, which in certain circles is in fact a serious liability. He is he has something which distinguishes him from the normal kind of celebrity, which is that at a time when in fact being a celebrity, the necessary price of being a celebrity is to be characterized by a kind of moral vacuity. Mr. Mankell is that very rare creature. He's a celebrity with moral stature. He is someone who has moral weight, and in fact the most recent claim, his most recent claim on our attention has been his participation in the Gaza flotilla. And it is this which distinguishes him from the usual run of vacuous celebrities. And I in fact had the pleasure of listening to him yesterday, and I am looking forward very much indeed to hearing him talk in this new situation, in this new forum, to a different audience. So, Mr. Mankell, please.
I would first like to say that naturally I'm very deeply honored to having been given this opportunity to make the Safdar Hashmi Memorial Lecture. It was obviously a very brave man who died in his line of duty as an actor, as an artist, while performing. As far as I understand, he was 34 years old when he died. He would have been, I guess, this year 56 years of age. But we shall not only remember him as he was, we shall always look upon him as a challenge to us of today. What do we do today? What do we not do today? What can we still learn from him of courage, of dedication, of decision, and of a strong belief in that the world are still possible to change for something better. Nothing is too late. I was reminded this morning when I had the wonderful opportunity to see a street performance in a working class area of New Delhi. It was wonderful, really. I didn't understand one word of what was said, but I understood everything. And to see the interaction between the audience sitting on the street and the actors just 1 meter in front of them, it was wonderful. I had a very strong sensation that brought me back to the roots of theatre. If we ask ourselves, who was the first actor in the world? We cannot answer to that. We have no idea. We only know that the first actors lived thousands upon thousands years ago. But we know one thing, and that is for sure that the first performances of theatre were outside. Maybe not in the streets, but at that time probably were no streets. Maybe it was paths. But we can imagine maybe on an open field, or somewhere an opening in the forest, or on the beach of a river or the sea. So the living theatre in the beginning was always outside, very close to the audience. And I had a feeling that what you did this morning was something that, in a way, was clearly linked to the earliest tradition of theatre that exists in the world. And I found that also very, very moving, and I found it very... I was once again sure about the enormous power that you can find in the living theatre as an instrument. So it was a very happy morning in New Delhi to see this performance. I can promise you I will never forget it. Dear friends, since I am a storyteller, I think I should start by telling you a story. And some of you unfortunately heard this story yesterday at the Swedish Embassy, but you can relax a little now or listen if I really tell you the same story. Anyhow, as we have said before, I spend a lot of my time on the African continent, especially since many years in a country called Mozambique, in southeast of Africa, with Tanzania on the head, in South Africa on the feet. If I start swimming outside in the Indian Ocean outside of Maputo, and if I swim long enough, I will end up in India, if I keep the direction. So we can wave to each other from India and Mozambique. In the early 80s, it was a terrifying civil war going on in Mozambique. And backed by the then apartheid system in South Africa, rebel groups of paid mercenary bandits did what they could to really destroy and confuse the situation in the country. It was really horrifying times. Someone has said that this was one of the most brutal civil wars that we saw in the 19th century in the world. And that, my friends, will not say little, because we have many brutal civil wars to choose between. Well, anyhow, during that time, once I visited the northern part of Mozambique, the Cabo Delgado province up against Tanzania. And once I was walking on a path towards the village. It was a destructed area, it was a burnt area. And suddenly I saw a young boy coming towards me on that path. And in the distance I could see that he was very thin. He was probably starving. He was hungry. His clothes were in rags. But then when he came very close to me, I saw his feet. And when I saw his feet, I saw something that I will never forget as long as I live. He had, in his deep misery, he had painted shoes on his feet. In a way to defend his dignity when everything was lost. He had found the colors from the earth, from herbs, and he had painted shoes on his feet. And I decided I will never forget this. Because what he's telling me is that there is a possibility for any of us in a certain bad situation to be able to do this resistance against everything that tries to oppress us. We can, all of us, paint shoes on our feet if necessary. I do not know what happened to that boy. I have no idea. I don't even know his name. I presume he's dead. But to me he lives on, and to me he showed this important fact, once again, that even in the deepest misery, we will have the most outstanding powers to make resistance. We have all the capacity of painting shoes on our feet. That boy is always in front of me when I'm writing my books or my theater plays or my screenplays or whatever. Normally a writer writes what he wants to read himself. That is the only thing you really can think of. And so it is for me too. I would hate to write a book that I wouldn't like to read myself. That would be ridiculous. But I also must say that that boy is also there. He's watching me. He's challenging me. Do you write about me? Do you write anything that could be important to me? So he's there also as a reader. What I now have told you really has happened in reality. But it also, of course, could have been a story that I invented. Of course. There is, as I see, only one definition of fiction that I accept. And that is, fiction is writing what could have happened, but not necessarily has happened. That is the only definition of fiction that exists. But I can put my hand on my heart, in this situation, this is not fiction. That boy, once upon a time, was in front of me. As you know, as one told, during the 90s, I wrote a series of socially critical crime fiction novels around the character of a police officer named Wallander. I have been told that many people has tried to use my novels as a kind of maps because they seem so real. They know where in Sweden everything takes place, and so they sit in the car and they take the book and they drive the roads. And suddenly they stop and say, it is here, but it's not here. What's wrong here? They say, but it must be here, but it's not here. Which is true. You see, what I do, since I write fiction, I do two kinds of researches. First, I found out what I really have to know, how things are. But then I also do something I would call a negative research. That is, I found out exactly what a certain point looks like, and then I start changing it. I take away a lake. I move a church from one place to another church. I put in an extra road, just so people cannot find it. And that means that I tell them, hey, this is fiction. This is what could have happened. This is not what have happened. And I think this is very, very interesting. And I also, by the way, do something else that no one, strangely enough, has found out. I put in every novel of Wallander, I put in something that's wrong. A little tiny thing that's wrong. No one has ever noticed that. In a way, I'm a bit disappointed with my readers. But I really thought that at least one person somewhere would say, hey, this is a detail, that can't be true. But so far it has never happened. So let's see if maybe you intelligent Indians will find something that is wrong in one book. I would be happy to hear about it. I grew up in the northern part of Sweden. My first memories in life are two things. It is cold and it's snow. I can still remember how it felt to go to school as 7 years old when it was below 30 degrees Celsius. When you cannot breathe, but you have to. And it was also always at that time when it was more below than 30, you could stay at home. So you were watching this say, please go down to 31, please come down to 31. But it always stopped with 30, so you had to move away. I grew up in a very remote and small community. I think maybe it was something like 2,000 people there. My father was a regional judge, which means that he was the highest authority in a way where we lived. But he was a very humble man and liked by everyone. I guess he really hated to be a sort of authority. He wanted to be something else. But what was a bit, oh, not a bit, but very strange with my upbringing was that there was no mother around. I will not dig too deep into this fact. It is indeed another story. But she had left, and my father had to care for 3 children himself. And at that time, in the 50s, that was very rare. And there was a lot of whispering, talking about these things. It was, to many people, a scandal, especially when a judge was supposed to live alone with 3 children. But I nevertheless do remember my first years in life was very happy, because my father was a very emotionally open man. He was not, as many men can be, he was not afraid of touching, of hugging, of showing emotions. So I really believe that I really felt very loved. And I never, as far as I can remember, really missed my mother when I was young. But obviously it was something strange to grow up without a mother. I grew up in a house very close to a river. And that river became, in my imagination, the Zambezi or the Congo, the Amazonas or the Ganges of my youth. I had read about all these strange and exotic places. I couldn't go there, but I could bring it to myself, as all children do. And why do I tell you this? Well, I tell you this because I believe that the real artist is the child. When we are children, without thinking about it, we have a profound trust and confidence in our imagination. There is at that time in life no real difference between reality and fantasy or imagination. We need our imagination not only to see how small stones can be formed to cars or boats or whatever that we can play with. We also need imagination and fantasy to be able to survive as children, to deal with the difficult questions that you put to yourself when you are a child, about life and death, about loneliness, happiness, about what you dream at night that scares you, etc., etc. You need imagination as a tool to deal with these problems. When you are 9 or 10 years old, if you remember well, you are really dealing with big, big questions of life. Peace and war, crime and punishment, and so on. Obviously, we can also say like this. If we didn't need imagination and fantasy to survive as human beings, why on earth would we have it? Because whatever we have as human beings, we need it to survive them. So that's the same with imagination and fantasy. And I think that when we start school, we lose a lot of that belief and trust in imagination. And if you later in life would like to come back to be an artist, you have in a way to reconquer what you had as a child, that trust in imagination and fantasy. I have had the opportunity to meet a lot of great artists in my life. And I can assure you that all of them agree with me that the childhood is maybe the most important source of experiences that you have in life. You have to go back to find the fantasy and imagination that you had as a child. Well, obviously there has been many other heroes in my life, but I can tell you that my greatest idol, you can never guess who that is. But that is myself as 10 years of age. I have, at that time in Sweden, every year it was taken photos in school. First a photo of the class and then every and each one sitting in his bench. And I have a photo taken when I was 10 years old. And when I look at that boy, I can think, oh, at that time I was at my best. I will never be so good as I was at that time. Because I can see in the eyes of that boy the belief that there is no obstacles whatsoever to deal with in the world. Everything is possible. Everything you can do, everything you can imagine, everything is possible. So I have that photo on my wall and I look at him many times and think, yeah, I will try even today to be as good as I was then, when I was 10 years old. But naturally there has also been other heroes in my life. I believe that we need heroes, people that we really respect. And you can ask yourself in 500 years from now, which are the people of our time that we will remember? Well, I guess we will remember some of the real evil ones, like Hitler, for example. He will be remembered. But the others, those that we can say are on the good side, who are they? Well, I believe, for example, that Nelson Mandela will live long in the future of the African history, in the minds and the spirits of the Africans and maybe also other people. And I also must say that I believe that Mr. Gandhi ought to be remembered in 500 years' time, because both of these two people, Nelson Mandela and Gandhi, brought something new to us. In both cases, they brought the ideas of civil disobedience, and also in Nelson Mandela's case, he came out after 27 years in prison without any thought of revenge. So I believe, I hope that in 500 years to come, we will remember those kind of people, and that they will be remembered from our very bad and ugly times, that there were some people that tried to do something for the better. I hope so, at least. But maybe now the time is here to challenge us with the most important question of all. What is indeed a human being? Normally we are defined as Homo sapiens, the wise man. And in a way that is true, even though today, if we look around, whether to Afghanistan or Iraq, we really don't have any reason to think that we are especially wise people. But that is maybe another story. But I wonder if not another answer to what a human being is at least possible. And to do so, there is now time for the second story I will tell you. And this story I did not tell yesterday, so now you can keep awake, those who heard the first story yesterday. It brings us to Africa. And I would like you to follow me in your imagination to Africa. As you all know, the best journeys in life you do in your imagination. You can travel with very light luggage. You don't need a passport, absolutely no visa, no ticket, and especially it's a very good place for your feet when you fly in your imagination. You really fly first class, all of you. As you know, some of you know, I work in the theater, the only professional theater in the country, as was mentioned. And sometimes in that theater it becomes very, very hot. There was an air conditioning working in the 60s, but after that it has never worked. And when it comes up to 50 degrees Celsius, it's very hot in the theater. So when we have a break, we run out in the street to hope for a refreshing wind blowing. Now, outside of the theater, there is a small stone bench that at a certain time of the day is in the shadow. Now, as you know, in hot countries, you not only brotherly and sisterly share water, you also share the shadow. And a few years ago, when I came out from the rehearsals, in a very, very hot day, I saw two black old men sitting on that bench. And I saw if they just moved a little, there would be place even for me. And I sat down there. Two very old black men and one not so old white man. And we sat there. Now, let me confess to you that I am a very eager eavesdropper. I really listen to what people talk about in coffee shops or whatever. And by the way, this is a parenthesis, the arrival of the mobile phone has changed my life completely. It's unbelievable what people can say on the mobile phones. I just remember a very short time ago I was on a train between two cities in Sweden. And suddenly a man in front of me is talking on the mobile phone, and suddenly I hear him say, "I've just arrived in Copenhagen." And I said, who on earth is he lying to? And I suppose immediately he's lying to a woman, and I really had the urge of shouting, "Don't believe him, he's on the train." Maybe I should have done it, but I didn't. But anyhow, I am an eavesdropper and I listen. And I started to listen to these two old black men. And obvious to me, they were talking about a third old man that recently had died. One of them said, "You see, I had been to his home, and he started to tell a wonderful story about something that had happened when he was young. But it was a long story, and it was night, so we said, okay, we take the end tomorrow." But then he was dead. Then it was a silence on that bench. And I decided I won't go from here until I heard what the other man would say to that. And I waited and waited and waited. And then finally the other man said something I shall even not forget as long as I live. He said, "It's not a good way of dying before you've told the end of your story." And at that very moment, I understood, I believe, what a human being really is. In Latin, it should be homo narrans, storytelling man. Because what is the difference between me and a cat? I mean, a cat cannot sit down with other cats and listen to the sorrows and hopes and dreams of the other cats. But a human being, I, can talk to you about my dreams and fears and experiences, and you can talk to me. We can communicate through storytelling and story listening. And at that moment on that bench, I really thought that, yeah, this is what human beings really are. We are storytelling. We have this capacity. We are the only animal that has this possibility. And I really think that at least to me, meant that I had understood something about what it really means to be a human being. And then you can think that every one of us is involved in this magical story of the human history. And this goes, I'm not a storyteller, it's not an author. I mean, the story of a taxi driver is the people that he transports from A to B. The story of a farmer is all the crops that he grows during his lifetime. The story of the chef in a restaurant is all the meals he has cooked for people. So this has nothing to do with an author. It has to do with all of us. We are storytelling, story listening people. And I think this is, in a way, very, very important. Let me stay a little on that theater. Just a little. I have many privileges in my life, I know that. But one of the greatest privileges I have is that I can sit alone in a room and write. And then at a certain point, I can raise from my chair, I can open a door to another room that is full of people, of actors, with whom I can make theater. And then at a certain time I can go back to the first room and be alone again. I suppose this is the most profound privilege I have in my life, to be both a director and being a writer. And when I came down to Mozambique to make, this is a long story, but making it short, I have been working on this only theater in Mozambique for now more than 25 years. During the Portuguese colonial times, theater for black people were forbidden. The black woman who is now the head of the theater was not even allowed to enter the theater at that time when she was young, not as an audience. She couldn't go into the theater. Today she's the head of the theater, so things are changing. And people ask me, what kind of theater do you do? What is the difference of making theater in that country or in the European country? And I say the difference has nothing to do with the actors, what is happening on the stage. The difference are in the audience. Because if I look upon you here as a Mozambican audience, if I take away you guys in the corner there and I say, congratulations, you can read and write. To the rest of you I say, sorry, you can't read and write. It means that obviously with an audience that most people are illiterate, obviously the living theatre becomes enormously important for these people. So that is what I say the most important thing. But Eva, my wife, who has been directing in that theatre, also says there is no difference in working with an African actor or working with a Swedish actor. And even to put them together, they don't speak the same language, but after 1 minute they will find a way to cooperate. And I honestly believe that today the living theatre is one of the few meeting places in the world. You know, in our homes it looks like a station where you send rockets away, you know, with all these things you do and you get thousands of channels. But the living theatre is the only meeting place where you and the actor will be in the same room, where you can feel each other's breath. And you know that this will never happen the same way again. This is completely unique. And I would say the day we lose the real theatre, the living theatre, we will lose something of basic of the spirit of human beings. So we have to defend the living theatre. If he loses that, I'm afraid of what will happen with us. We have done everything in that theatre down there. But I just want to mention for you, once in 1992, we made an adaptation of a 2,000-year-old Greek play, Lysistrata. And maybe you know what it's about. It's this, the women that makes an erotical strike. They say, no man comes to my bed until they've stopped the war. And this was during the civil war in Mozambique. And we spoke with some women in the market, and they thought this was an excellent idea. So we were a little afraid that we had started something that we really didn't know what would happen with it. But anyhow, we made a performance. And then we had decided during a long time that the last performance would be on the 2nd of October 1992. Why, I don't remember. But then the magical thing happens that on that Sunday morning, where we at night were supposed to play the last performance, on that Sunday morning it was a peace agreement signed that ended the civil war. And then I told the actress that was playing Lysistrata, I told her, after the performance during the applause, raise your hands and say like this. She listened and said, oh yes, I'll do that. So after this last performance, she did like that, and then she said, as you all know, we have today a peace agreement, but I can assure you, if necessary, we will start to perform this production again. And then it was completely silent. People were so moved. And I still have difficulties telling you this story, because it's so strong emotionally, even for me, to think about that moment and the silence in the theatre. That was a moment not to forget. So we play everything, and our difference is the fact that we have an audience that in many ways does not speak or doesn't read or write. I would like to say something more about Africa. Why on earth did I go to Africa? Well, I came to Africa the first time when I was 40 years ago. As you see, I'm a very old man, or I was very young at that time. And why did I go as a young author to Africa? Well, I wanted to come out of the European egocentricity, to try to see the world from another perspective. And when I go back to Africa in March this year, I do it for the same reasons. I believe that the African experience has made me a better European in a way. That is, that I have had a distance and I see much clearer the human condition of the world. And when I come here to India, I feel that I can relate to the African experience here in India much more than to the European experience, which I find very, very interesting. So I really honestly believe that by living in Africa and working in Africa, I have become a better writer. I have understood more about the human conditions in life. And this has, to me, been very, very important. And naturally also, Africa has become a theme, a mission for me. I have been very, very angry about what I see. I think I have been talking now to you for 40 minutes, and I'll soon stop. I think something, if I count now quickly, I think something like 1,500 children has died of malaria on the African continent during these 40 minutes. And not one single child need to die of malaria. It's just that the pharmaceutical companies doesn't earn any money from it, so they don't care. We have already spoken about illiteracy, and I find it, as a writer, I must talk about it, I find it a shame for me and for everyone that we still, year 2011, are finding millions upon millions of young people going out in the world without the tools of reading and writing in their hands. They cannot even read to understand why they are living in such a misery that they are living in. And we could have sorted this out yesterday. The worst thing with our misery today is that so much of it is not necessary. I think it was Oxfam, the English organization, that a few years ago tried to find out how much money it would cost to eradicate illiteracy in the world. And they found out it would cost the same amount as we spend on food for cats and dogs in Europe during 1 year. No, I don't say that we shan't give food to our pets. Of course we shall. But it gives a perspective on what on earth we are doing, but not eradicating illiteracy in the world. And I know this is also a problem here in India. And I mean, this is one of the basic problems for the humans today. Because I believe that as long as too many people don't know how to read and write, it will be difficult to change anything. Whether it is to fight the AIDS epidemic or fight the political epidemics that we see in the world. In Maputo, as in all big cities, there are street children. You find them everywhere. And as you know, street children, they don't any reason to have a trust in a grown-up person. They are abandoned, or they have left, or they are living in a terrible misery. And they are normally lying to you the whole time, because they try, if you ask them something, they give you an answer that probably that they hope will make you cry, so you will give them something more. There was a group of street children in Maputo that, they do the same as here, I guess. They take care of the car, and, and if you don't pay them something, they scratch the car, and, it is blackmail, but you have to deal with it. But there was a group, I think, of 7 street children that took care of my car. And after 1 year, they started to have a little trust in me. And then one day I asked them one thing, a very simple question. I asked them, what do you want most of all in life? And I thought stupidly enough that they would say that they wanted a mother or a family or some food or some clothes or something like that. No. They wanted something else. And all of them individually gave me the same answer. They said, what I want most of all is an ID card with my photo on and my name on, to show the world that I am I, and I can't be interchanged with anyone. I am I, and you shall always remember that me is me. And that naturally made me think. What happened after that is, by the way, that we made a performance about street children in the theatre, that we now have performed for 10 years. And not as a tragedy, but to prove how enormously with what kind of capacity these children has. So that learned a lot to me about human condition. I jump a little because, as we say in Sweden, I could be talking here until the cows come home at night. It's going to be too long, and I would like also that we should talk a little, and you will have questions to me. I would talk a little more about the crime stories. All of these stories has an invisible subtitle, a novel about an understandable crime, I would say. I did never have a wish per se to write crime fiction. My point of view was something else. When people ask me what has been my most profound inspiration, I usually say, for example, yeah, I'm very inspired by Medea, the play that was written 2,000 years ago in Greece. That play is about a woman who kills her 2 children because of jealousy in relation to her husband. Now, if that is not a crime story, I don't know what a crime story is, really. Or we can go 500 years ago, 400 years ago, we had a man in England that wrote Macbeth. That is probably the most interesting political thriller I ever read in my life. No one calls that a thriller, but that is exactly what it is. And what I mean is that probably crime fiction, in a way, is one of the oldest literary genres that exist. People understood long time ago, and even if in your classical work, Mahabharata, you have also a crime involved in it. I think that holding up a mirror of crime, to look upon contradictions in society, that is one of the oldest literary genres that exist. And this is what I try to do, really. And so I find my inspiration in that. And I believe that this is also why I think that my stories has been so accepted worldwide, in a way. Because people see that this has anything to do with, nothing to do with pulp fiction. It has something to do with reality and life. When I created this man Wallander, I had an idea that I wanted to create a man that is like you and me, that is always changing. And what we have been talking about now, all of it, is language. And I think it would be a proper way to end this by talking a little about language. Let me first talk about my right hand. If I meet a person in the street of Stockholm, and I know that person has a daughter, maybe she's 12, 13, and I would ask sooner or later, but she must be tall now, I would say. And my friend would probably do like that. Yeah, she's something like that. Something. If you transfer this situation now to Africa, same situation, I meet a friend, he has a daughter, and I ask, oh, she must be tall now. Then probably my African friend will do like this. Yeah, she's like that. Because this is growing. This is stop. And I don't put any value in this. I just say even in this little thing there is a language. And I find it very, very interesting to see there are so many, many, many languages. And now I tell you something that happened to me. This is very funny. It wasn't funny for me then, but now it's funny. On my way to India, there is a small island in the Indian Ocean outside of Maputo. I visited once, and at night I heard some drumming in the distance, and I saw some campfires. And I knew there was a village there, so I went there through the darkness. And when I came to that village, I saw that there was some kind of ceremony going on. The women were dancing and the men were drumming. And I was very welcome to sit down somewhere, and I looked at them, and I thought I should introduce myself. At least I should explain to these people, who am I, this white person coming out of the darkness here. So when there was a little break in this ceremony, I turned to an old woman. She must have been 1,000 years old, I think, who was the head of the village. You know, she had that. Sometimes you can see, I think there is nothing so beautiful as very old ladies' faces, where you can see the whole life in the face, all the wrinkles in the face. And she had such a wonderfully beautiful face. That is why I say she was 1,000 years old. And I told her that I very much like to tell these people who I was and where I came from. And I said, oh yeah, please do. And very quickly everyone was placed about the way you are sitting. And I started in Portuguese, as we speak in that country, and I started to say that my name is this and that, and I come from a country very far away. And after that old lady said, stop. And then she said, this is the third thing I mention for you that I will never forget as long as I live. She said like this. Well, if you really from the bottom of your heart would like to tell us who you are and where you come from, you have to dance. So that was not a very easy situation, because I never ever imagined me being any Michael Jackson in any perspective. And but what could I do? I mean, I just couldn't. I had to do something, because otherwise it would have been arrogant. So with some helpless notion, help of a drum, I managed to do some movement, and I stopped as quickly as possible, and the women were looking like that, and it was completely silent. And I thought, my God. And then that old lady said, well, after having seen you dance, we cannot, even in our most wild imagination, understand who you are or where you come from. But that is our limitations. Now I decided never to forget that, because it told me once again something that actors know, that the body language are in certain situations much more important than what comes out of your mouth. So there are a lot of languages around, and for me that is a writer, it's so important to remember that there are also so many other languages that we must take care of and respect. There's much more that could be said, but I think by telling you about my way of looking on life, there is one more thing that was mentioned before, that yes, I was aboard this flotilla that was bound for Gaza. We wanted to break the illegal occupation of that part of Israel. I thought it was a good thing, a good idea to do this. And I was quite sure from the beginning that the Israeli soldiers will stop us, and they will do it in the easiest way. They will throw some chains or whatever in the propellers, and then we won't come in for them. But they decided to do something else. They decided to go into on international water with brutal force and shoot down and kill people. Some people were really executed because they were shot between the eyes. I could never imagine that the Israelis would be so stupid to do it, because it was stupidity. Because in a way we changed the world with this flotilla, because after that no one in the world has any more illusions about what's going on in that country. And to me it is once again to see the ugly face of the apartheid system rising. I saw it go down in South Africa. I saw it go. And now I see it back again in Israel. And I hope to live long enough to see it go even more. I believe personally that the best solution there would be a sort of South African solution. I don't know whether that is possible. But one thing I know, the situation now is unbearable. And we have to give our support to these people. There is someone who said once something that I believe is very, very fundamental for us human beings. to understand, and that is, as long as one single person is still oppressed in the world, no one is really free. I believe that is true. I have believed that since I was 20 years old, and I believe this until I die. My instrument to talk about this is by writing, whether it is a book, a novel, whether it is a theatre play, or whether it is, that is my main idea of being a storyteller. Let me end by giving you an African proverb. It's very good. Especially you should use it when you meet politicians that talk too much. Human beings are born with 2 ears, 1 tongue. Yeah. Because we should listen and listen. With these words I say thank you. I will listen to your questions. I don't know whether I will answer them, but I will listen. And we have to limit also a little, because I have promised to sign books, and I realize there is quite some. So I don't have really, there is a lot of young people that come to me and ask, what shall I do to become a writer? And I don't have any good advices to give, but I have 2 advices, which are not really advices. The first thing is that you have to burn to tell a story for someone else. That is the basic thing of being an author. If you don't burn to tell the story for someone else, don't be a writer, because then... The second thing is that you have to find your language. And how do you find your language? Well, I don't know really, but I'm quite sure that if people open a book of mine, they can see immediately that this is he who has written this. And you find your language by... I remember when I was very young, I imitated things that I really liked in books. This was a good part. And then I wrote it myself, just to have a feeling, how was this written? So there are many ways, but you have to find your language, and you have to burn to tell the story for someone else. That's a good starting for being a writer, I think. The rest is up to you.
I have a supplementary.
Oh, there are many questions. Yeah, please, it's you. Take care of this.
Do you write differently in Mozambique and in Sweden?
No. You see, like that. The only difference is maybe I write on a little other times, because it's very hot down there. So you chose maybe to write other times of day or morning or night. But there is no difference at all. I have been forced in my life to learn to write wherever I am. Right now I'm sitting in a hotel room here and writing a few hours every day. So I was thinking yesterday that the most strange place I ever wrote in was when I was 19 years old. I was in Stockholm, I had nowhere to stay. And there was a friend of mine who had the keys to an apartment where there was no furniture. But it was a fully equipped kitchen. And there was electricity. So if you opened the oven, there was a light inside the oven. And you can use that as a bench if you sat on the floor. And in that sense, I wrote a play, sitting with that oven. And I still think about that. That was probably a very happy time of my life. So I really think I can... it was also in 1993 I wrote a book called The White Lioness. And at that time I lived in Mozambique, where I was surrounded by neighbors that had radios loudly on 3 different programs. And I decided, if I manage to write in this chaos, I won't be afraid of anything. It happened a few times that I went out and said, oh please, can't you at least choose the same program? And you know, they were very understanding. So then, you know what they did? They closed everything down for 15 minutes. And I thought that would be enough for you. And then they started all over again. So I have learned to survive.
No, my question got asked.
Okay, wonderful, yes.
Can you tell us how your first book got published and your experience of publishers?
I'm probably a very lucky man, because I've never been refused. by a publisher. The first script I ever sent to a publisher, I was 22, I think, and it was accepted immediately. And I also got very good reviews of that, so I was the lucky one not to be refused. I have never been refused. And sometimes I feel that maybe I should have been that, because that would lead me to understand how many authors of great capacity that has been struggling so very much of being published, but I never had that experience, so I guess I was very lucky.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, we can take 1, 2, or 3 more.
Three more, yes.
Three more.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in British and American fiction, the crime fiction,
Yes.
the voice of social critique and despair comes from private detectives. But Kurt Wallander is a police detective, and I'm sure that in Mozambique, like in India too, those people are not really people to be trusted, the police. So I was wondering whether there was any special reason that this was a choice that you made to make him not a PI.
It is just that we don't have really in Sweden traditional private eyes. We don't have that. There are, but they are not to the extent that you have them in the United States. And I also believe that there are quite more uncorrupted police officers in Sweden than in many other countries. So I think that was my reason for it. What I find though interesting with the American crime fiction is that in the books there is mostly pulp fiction. But if you look at the movies in the United States, they have a lot of social criticism in it. Much more than we have in Sweden, while we in the books have much more than the Americans. So this is it is an interesting difference, I would say. I don't have any clever answer to it, I just accept that there is a difference. Yeah.
Okay.
First, do you foresee any positive change in the situation in Palestine? And this is not a political question.
No, I don't see, I see a situation reversing to the worse. I think with the arrogance that they are breaking day to day, they are breaking the not construction of new housings in the Palestinian areas. Now they are starting to construct 1,500 new houses in East Jerusalem. I think this is terrifying. And I also was very worried that the Americans doesn't understand that they have to include the moderate part of Hamas in the discussions, because Hamas is two things. Hamas is obviously one part who really thinks that Israel should be destroyed completely. But there is also another part of Hamas that are willing to discuss. And the Americans only say we don't discuss with Hamas. And that is, today I would see, this is negative things. The positive thing is something that I also saw in South Africa in the 80s. And that is that more and more Jewish people in Israel realizes this can't go on. So I think I have a lot of contact with these people, and they need all our support, because they will be very, very important to change that society from inside. But I would lie to you if I'm very optimistic for the time being. I'm not.
Yeah.
Sir, during your talk, you talked about that there could be a way possible for the South Africa, for the Israel to have a way of South Africa for their own. But practically, we have seen that it hasn't done very much justice to the South African blacks. So, do you really think that Israel should do it? And another question is that how much do you miss your childhood?
Yeah, okay, if I take the last question first, I do not miss my childhood at all. I'm very afraid of looking too much backwards. I'm very grateful in a way to my childhood. But I would never would like to repeat my life. Then it would be something very, very strange, I think. So, no, I'm not missing my childhood. But I wouldn't change it for someone, no. What about South Africa? I think this is a very clever and intelligent question. But what we have to understand from the very beginning is that South Africa managed to get rid of the apartheid system without a civil war, which everyone thought would happen.
And that is a triumph in itself. Now, today there are many new problems. For example, the corruption of ANC, as you mentioned, the problems that young black people still have there. There's heavy, serious problems, but that is not the same to say that it was not a triumph that they got rid of the apartheid system without a civil war. That was a triumph. So I think these are two different things. So, but I agree completely that there are very, very serious problems in South Africa, and I'm very worried. But these are other kinds of problems. It's not the apartheid kind of problem. Yeah, one more question then.
Sir, I would like to know, how do you see crime, like as a social product or a product of one's nature?
Oh.
I don't think that there is. I have met many people in my life that has committed evil things, but I have never met a person that was born evil. What I believe is that we have to fight the evil circumstances in the world. If you know what happened in Europe in the 90s, the war at the Balkans, where good neighbors started slaughtering each other suddenly. It was not because they became evil in any way. It was a lot of creation of evil circumstances that created what happened there. Provocations and etc., etc. Exactly what happened in Rwanda. So I believe that we always have to search for the circumstance that creates crime. And I would say, obviously, the absolute most common reason for crime in the world of today, that's poverty. That's poverty. If I look at Mozambique, 95% of all crime is done by people who doesn't have anything. They doesn't have food, they doesn't have anything. So I believe that poverty is the biggest circumstances that exist in the world to create crime.
I must confess that I'm not a great reader of science crime fiction.
So I'm not either. So
I read only one novel of yours, and that too only the last 1 week because I got into cold diabetic, but I heard of your visit and decided to come to the lecture. And the novel that I could lay my hands on was called The Firewall.
Yeah.
Now I was struck, I mean talking entirely on the basis of this one novel, I was struck by the phrase that recurs in that novel, I think 2 or 3 times. The phrase is, we live in a vulnerable society. Now I have 2 short questions. One, is the society in Africa as vulnerable as in Europe? And have you set any of your novels in Africa?
Mm-hmm. I have set many of my novels in Africa, Europe in a way. 6, 7 I think. One of these crime fiction novels, The White Lioness, is based in South Africa. The vulnerability of society, I would say that, for example, in a society like Mozambique, where the civil society is very weak, that is probably the weakest society that exists. And what you always have to build up is the civil society in a country. Because without a civil society that's strong enough, then everything, the people with the power can use you in any way they want. So I would say, yes, we are living, of course Mozambique is a much more vulnerable society than Sweden, because Sweden has very, very strong civil society. So I would say, yes, I remember I wrote that, and I still believe this is a fact. But you can also say that Sweden is now more and more a vulnerable society in a world where we, for example, stupidity enough was taking part in the Afghan war, all these things. It's ridiculous that we have soldiers there that will die, and we try to fight against that, but that makes us vulnerable. In December we had the first terror attack in Stockholm, so it's coming closer and we create it ourselves. Now I think we have reached the end here. Maybe the doctor.
Yes.
We give the last question to the doctor here.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask one thing. You said that poverty gives rise to crime. Yes, petty crime.
But most of the big crimes are perpetrated by people who have money.
Yeah, but isn't that also connected to poverty, if you think? I mean, the rich people of a country like Mozambique, they can do whatever they do because the civil society is very weak. The people's protest is not heard. So, I mean, if the civil society had been stronger, these rich people would have much more difficulties in doing their crime. So, I mean, even in that sense, it is interconnected with the poverty. But you have to turn the question around a little. So, okay, my friends, it was nice meeting you, and I will be out there to sign the books if it's... No, I'll do it here.
Yes, I think
I'll do it.
I think this is
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.